Okay, great. That's us recording now.
Right.
So yeah, we've got Adam Knowles here, who is an existential psychotherapist and also conducts research on participants who are attending ayahuasca retreats. So yeah, maybe we'll just start by asking you, Adam. Can you tell us a little bit about your research and what it is that you've done so far?
Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist, an existential psychotherapist, and it was part of my studies to do a research element. So that was the first time I encountered, doing research as a researcher in a kind of academic way. And I decided to research ayahuasca experiences of those in the UK, and I decided to do that with a qualitative methodology. So these were interviews. So I did a small number of interviews that then analysed in depth using interpretive phenomenological analysis, which I didn't really. So that's IPA. I didn't really know IPA very well when we started, but as the research went on, I really started to see some benefits of it, and how kind of philosophically it's aligned with what I was doing as a therapist and my training as well.
Okay.
So really, I wanted to know what the experience was, and I suppose acute experience and longer term experience of any potential. I mean, people talk about benefits of ayahuasca, but I was asking a very open question about what was the experience like? You know, was it good? Was it bad? Was it a mixture? Was it bad and then good? Both in the short term, kind of 4 to 6 hours of the ayahuasca experience, and then longer term. So most of the people that I interviewed were kind of obviously people have taken ayahuasca multiple times, but most of them were kind of 6 or 12 months after their last or most recent ayahuasca experience.
Okay.
And then it was my job to analyze those transcripts over a year or so, and then try and kind of distill it down into points of similarity and difference between, so in a sense, themes. And the result was 5 themes from that research.
Okay. And the method of analysis you mentioned, and did you say interpretive phenomenological analysis?
That's it. Yeah.
And what was it in particular about that method that lends itself well to exploring the sort of phenomenology of an ayahuasca retreat?
Yeah, well, the phenomenology is a word that's thrown about a lot within psychedelics, right? It can mean a number of different things. What I mean by it is a approach informed by Edmund Husserl's thinking in the sort of 19th century. So it's a distinctly Husserlian, and then as modified by Heidegger and Sartre and Gadamer and Merleau-Ponty and Simone de Beauvoir and others in the 20th century. So it's what lends itself is that it's really inductive and it's really ideographic. Those two things, inductive and ideographic. So in other words, it pays very close attention to exactly what is happening in front of me, which is in a sense one step removed from what was happening in front of them. So it doesn't start with any hypothesis. It doesn't start with any theory. In fact, it very intentionally brackets those things away and shunts them to the side, so that you can, as a researcher and for the participant, to kind of almost re-experience the experience of ayahuasca and then speak about it in some level of reflection or a deeper level of reflection, but always connected to exactly how it was as it happened for them. So typically, for instance, as the interviewer, I would tend to steer people away from any kind of judgments about, oh, it was really great. It's not very interesting research. I'd say it's great. But if they say that they, as one of my participants did, say that they inhabited the body of their own father when he was 5, and then experienced what a struggle life was for him, which helped her to understand why her father wasn't a great father to her, if you want to follow the line of that. It's in a sense a fairly typical psychedelic experience, but it's my job to hear that, understand it, write it down, and then analyze it as that. So it's a very meaningful experience to her that doesn't doesn't lend itself to being glossed over in terms of just saying, oh, memories come up, or you think about your family or something. It's much more gritty than that, and it's much more specific and much more informative when you do it at that level of detail, which means working phenomenologically, which means using these ideas and processes created by these philosophers, basically in the past 200 years or so.
Okay, so it's a good way of analysing one's experience without tainting, or without twisting their words, or without sort of biasing it with your sort of input.
Well, sort of. This isn't trying to be objective. It's not about, even the tainted idea is in a sense kind of imported. A little, feels to me a little bit imported from a kind of scientific naturalism or a quantitative worldview. So it's very much it's just as it is. The mantra is back to the things themselves. Things are tainted, but they're tainted by them and they're tainted by me. And it's then about kind of really noticing even what the taint tells you about the thing you're investigating. So then it gets all a bit weird because, as you can imagine, right? Because you're trying to, everyone has a worldview, everyone has a sort of philosophy of their own, which are sort of lenses through which they, this is back to Huxley and, the filmiest of layers between us and different aspects of reality, or reality tunnels you might have heard of, that get stuck in reality tunnels. But the phenomenological approach allows you to examine both the reality tunnel, or the rose-tinted glasses, as well as the thing that's being looked at. Okay. Because you can't, with a view that you can't separate the two. We're always looking at the world in a biased way, in a particular way, informed by our history and according to our hopes and dreams. So it's kind of taking all of that and then afterwards trying to analyze it to say what it shows you about the world, or in this case, the ayahuasca experience, and then what it tells you about the person, which then is the link to psychotherapy as well. It tells you a lot about the person as to what they highlight, what they leave out, and what they emphasize.
Okay. One of the things I was going to ask you, you mentioned you had a few, was it 5 themes that came up? So yeah, I guess I'm just interested about what can we learn, what can people learn from studying, from researching people who are attending psychedelic retreats, whether it's ayahuasca or psilocybin.
Yeah, well, it's early days, right? There's so much to find out in all sorts of ways about psychedelics. I've picked ayahuasca because for personal reasons, I suppose. I find it particularly alluring and I have a huge curiosity about it. I know that most of the research in the field is about psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine, and so on. Ibogaine as well. But the 5 themes that I discovered, I'll list them for you, which was, first of all, an intercultural exchange. That's very present with ayahuasca, and perhaps it might not be with MDMA or something, with the indigenous traditions that apply to ayahuasca. So there was very much, because most of these participants went to foreign retreat centers. So there's an intercultural, and even if they didn't, there's the culture of ayahuasca as this, as a kind of romantic backstory that it has. So that was very much there for them, an intercultural exchange. Mm-hmm. Different paths of healing within that field. Ayahuasca as one of, yoga or body work or psychotherapy. So different paths of healing that you can take. Ayahuasca as one of them. Psychotherapy is another, perhaps. And then, but the main theme really was about changes in participants' lives. So, and that's really answers your question, Jake, as to what I was really trying to get to. In a sense, that's the master theme, that people's lives change. That in significant ways, subtle changes of identity, of who people think they are. For instance, one of my participants, talked of himself as an addict. At the start of before he'd taken ayahuasca, then broadly afterwards did not identify as an addict, and thought that, and yet he really struggled with that, because as someone that was addicted, and what he was addicted to was drugs, he was very suspicious of himself, thinking that he was just taking another drug, and obviously the fear was he'd get addicted to ayahuasca. This doesn't tend to happen, I think, because of the vomiting and the general difficulties that come up with ayahuasca. And indeed, it didn't for him. And indeed, it really helped him. But cognitively, it took a lot for him. Not just cognitively, in kind of the cultural discourses. You know, a drug addict goes and takes loads of drugs. He couldn't talk himself into it, and it took him many years and some great advice and some good friends to kind of keep bringing him back into contact with the possibility of taking ayahuasca, that he was able to make one of those changes.
And in terms, I'm interested in that game in particular, just because that's where my work is in addictions.
Yeah.
What was it that helped him to overcome his addiction, or to treat his addiction? Was it a shift in perspective? Was it sort of seeing himself in a new light, seeing his problems in a new light? What was it that did it for him?
The question is always, what is the addiction an answer to? You know, for me, as a psychotherapist, that's generally what, you know. Okay, so you're drinking every night, but what is that? Okay, that's the problem. You're telling me that's the problem. But what is that an answer to? What is your addiction a solution to? And for him, it was about. I mean, he was adopted, and struggled to really. I want to say own his place in the world, right? So all of his drug taking behaviors were not really, you know, they were about something. They were about some pain, some suffering that he was dealing with. And this is what I hear time and time again with ayahuasca and other psychedelics, is that they don't treat the addiction, because that's a response. They go further downstream or upstream, whatever you want to say, to the thing that really hurts, that's really hurting, that's really unresolved. And yes, as you say, Jake, a change of perspective, a broader perspective. Basically, he felt for the very first time. I remember him saying the word roots, as in, you know, the roots of the ayahuasca vine, the roots of the forest, the roots of the tree, and the roots of him as a human, and meeting his ancestors going back, you know, hundreds of years, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, and feeling a sense of welcome and belonging, as part of the network, part of the sort of psychedelic mycelial network of existence. After having felt separate from it before, he felt in it, and then the sort of need to take drugs and kind of get out of it, or cope, or just get through the day, just sort of for him, just filtered down and went away, and he just didn't feel it anymore. And then, so he wasn't trying to give up drugs. You know, it just wasn't. He no longer had to stop. He no longer had to try to stop taking drugs. He just didn't need them in the first place anymore. That was his story.
So it was a sort of an increase in connectedness and connection with himself, with his roots, with the roots of ayahuasca, and with the roots of his family as well, that he experienced.
You could definitely put it that way. You know, obviously it's a big theme in psychedelic research, is connection and acceptance. Perhaps Ross Watt's work springs to mind here, but it's found in lots of different studies. Connectedness to nature, a change in connectedness to self and how you perceive of self, and connected to others, and perhaps absent others as well. For him, his birth family and things like that, and culture as well. You know, because there was immigration in his background as well. So it was all of that coming together. You're absolutely right, Jake. It was feeling that increase. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify, but that was certainly an important aspect of what made the change for him. Yeah.
Okay. And what were the other major themes that came up in your research? Was it? I think we got to the third one, did we?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember now. It was a couple of years ago since I last did it, and I've sliced it various ways. In a sense that, like I say, the main one was about the change in participants' lives, intercultural exchange, different paths of healing. Yeah, those are the main ones that spring to mind at the moment. I'll try and include a slide that has the diagram of all of them, but. Actually, what I've learned since doing the research and since doing the Talk for Breaking convention is that the relevance of those themes changes depending on what the question is. So I'm trying not to just present them as, and these are the findings, because it depends. And for this conversation, I think those three are perhaps the most relevant.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. And are there any sort of particular challenges about doing this type of research that you encountered?
Well, yeah, I mean, God, myriad. Doing research is hard, man. It's mind-blowingly different to everything that I've done before. The skill, there's interview skills. There is lots of things about confidentiality and ethics. And then the transcription, I'd never transcribed anything before. But I suppose over and above all those practical difficulties, for me, trying to, I'm from Manchester, and I have a bit of a sort of underdog vibe, really, that I as a psychotherapist, which is very middle class, as a kid from Manchester, I don't really fit into that mold. And then as a researcher trying to do anything in academia, almost, I suppose what I'm saying is imposter syndrome is something I've struggled with a lot personally, of feeling entitled to say something about psychedelic or about anything, about and obviously I've sort of chosen this topic because it's edgy, right? It's on the edge of what academia allows. Obviously, we're trying to expand that edge, expand that sphere. But yeah, trying to think in a suitably academic way without giving up my personality and without giving up the things I care about, and trying to do it in an informed and compassionate way is all a dance that I have really stumbled my way through. And now that I'm doing a PhD, that's only amplified. It's a challenge that I find absolutely fascinating, but it's hard work, and I sort of admire anybody that manages to engage with it. Yeah.
And I guess, to play maybe slightly devil's advocate, but what would you say to to naysayers that would say that this is sort of quite a self-selecting group of patients? And I don't know, we live in the world where the randomized controlled trial is king, and sort of that's the gold standard for research. What would you say to people that might sort of argue that you can't read too much into this? These are people that are going to attend retreats and get from it what they will.
Yeah, well, I'd say you can't read too much into an RCT. You'd be going equally wrong. So on the one hand, if you study something in a lab or in an fMRI scanner, it's profoundly disconnected from the way that people take drugs in the real world. So what are you really studying? You're attempting to do something acontextual. But in doing so, I sometimes describe it as, like trying to study a frog by dissecting it. You're not going to learn about froggy behavior, really, because you've already killed it. And there's something about it being alive, or let's expect to a human being alive, which is more than the sum of its parts. And any attempt to slice it into consistent blocks is always going to fail, or not fail. Clearly, there is reason to dissect a frog. You will understand something of its anatomy, and that will show itself in its behavior. But there will be something else when it's alive and ribbiting around that will not be obvious. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is offer this other thing, offer some insight into studying the whole alive human being as experienced by themselves. And so, yes, you're right. It's self-selecting, but again, I would argue that any experiment is, why ketamine rather than psilocybin? Why use this inventory to measure it rather than that inventory to measure it? There's a lot of kind of often hidden preferences and agendas behind the so-called objective science. And the attempt with what I do is to really put that up front and say, well, this is why I'm studying it. In a sense, I'm permitted to find the best examples. I have no duty to be objective. All I'm claiming is this happened. I'm not claiming it's generalizable. I'm not even trying to. I'm not trying to say this is what will happen for everybody. All I'm trying to say is that for these 4 people, this is what happened. And what's funny is that the irony is that every time I've done that, when you get in real detail about what happened with one person, people go, yeah, I really resonate with that. I felt that aspect of what they've described as well, and it tells them something about themselves. So I find it fascinating, and obviously I think we just need both.
Yeah, so it's pragmatic and it's real world.
It's real world, yeah, exactly, and it's holistic, and it's based on what the sense that people themselves make of something, you know, in their own terms. So again, it's very much the power is all theirs, you know, and then I'm trying to, you know, we often say in qual research, kind of give voice to the participant, you know, try not to impose anything on them as much as possible, and then to kind of draw out from them and then represent that to the world of academia or knowledge more plainly.
Yeah. You've kind of touched on my next question, but it's going to be sort of, what are your thoughts, what are your feelings about that sort of transposing ayahuasca from the jungle into the lab? And I read recently there's pharmahuasca, they're trying to sort of reduce it to a DMT pill these days. Do you feel that sort of that limits the research, limits the potential of ayahuasca?
You know, this is where my existentialism comes in. I mean, I'm all for it, actually. That's not so much about ayahuasca coming out of the jungle into the lab. It's more about ayahuasca coming out of South America into the rest of the world, right? And it will need to be reinvented. I care a lot about giving credit to and making sure that we're kind of being fair economically and politically to the decades and centuries of work that have gone into this, that's gone uncredited from the indigenous populations that really know their stuff. And I don't want to just kind of take that, patent it and sell it. I think that would be unfair. But at the same time, I think that everything is reinterpreted according to cultural things, and what particularly, you know, what an ordinary person on the British High Street needs or would benefit from ayahuasca is going to be different from a kind of animist or spiritist interpretation of a high dose of ayahuasca in the middle of the jungle being bitten by mosquitoes, right? So there's got to be some adjustment. I think that we've got to admit there's got to be some adjustment. Then the question is, what adjustment is appropriate? And then lots of people have different opinions, right? And what I don't want is that just the vested interests with all the power, all the big pharma and all that, just automatically win. A big part of what I'm doing personally with the British Psychedelic Association is to try and provide some sort of alternative path towards that, which is a bit more grassroots and a bit more wider, you know, not so narrowly focused on psychiatric diagnoses and things like that. So yeah, I think that. But the reason I reacted the way I did, Jake, was because, you know, it's not for me to say, no, you can't do that and you can't do this. You know, people are going to do what they're going to do, and things are starting to really flower. And I think that's quite psychedelic. You know, it's kind of endless flowering of things, and we're just evolutionarily going to try lots of things. I know that if you do the pharmahuasca thing and you edit it, and you get rid of the vomiting, then the likelihood is that you're going to lose some important things. But maybe the way to find that out is to lose them and go, well, that didn't work, and go back. You know, I have no problem with that. So I'm not trying to take up any kind of authoritarian position of, you know, finger wagging. You know, people are going to do what they're going to do, and it's going to expand in all sorts of directions at once. And some of those I have a personal view about of being a good idea or a bad idea, but also I'm not particularly inclined to stop people from, or to try and stop people from doing things that I think are bad ideas. You know, that's their lives and that's their loss in a sense.
And final question for you. So we'll have probably quite a few psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists, most people from the field of mental health coming along to our event. We're hoping to widen the network and get a bit more interdisciplinary interests involved. But any final words, any final thoughts to inspire a generation of psychedelic researchers in Scotland?
Well, I mean, you've said it, Jake. It's really wonderful. You know, it's such a wonderful thing to hear that's happening. You know, and it's a credit to you and to everybody there that's watching today. I just want to encourage you to get stuck in and do your thing, right? Whatever that is. You may disagree with lots of things that I've said, and that's fine. Do that. You know, go off and whatever your particular individual talent or your interest or your bit of something in your background that means that you're going to be particularly good at that bit, you know, try and deliver it. You know, it's so the field is wide open, right? It's wide open. It's still early days, right? It's not all been done. You know, there's Gabor Mate, and there's Joe Taffer, and there's Bia Levacha, and there's all these great researchers of the past decades. But there's so much left to discover about all this stuff. You're still on. We're in the first kind of 10th of something that's going to revolutionize not just psychiatry and medicine, but way beyond. I hope the way we live as humans. You know, really big question, and there's so much that needs to be explored in that. So, you know, yeah, if you're questioning, if you're critical, if you're able to dance between the past and the future of how we've used to think and conceive of difficulties for people, you know, this language of addictions or personality disorders or mental illnesses, all this isn't language I use, but the needle is starting to shift, and it's pointing towards I might say a sort of paradigm shift, a sort of Kuhnian paradigm shift, sort of revolution, slowly, you know, and it's got to be done mindfully, and we need good people to do that. So if any of them are with you there, then yeah, get stuck in.
Great. So in short, just get stuck in. Perfect. That's a good note to end on. So yeah, thanks a lot for your time, Ada.
Thanks, Jake.
Cheers.